Hey, everybody. Welcome to Hints and Guesses, my podcast. This is Kent Dobson. Thanks for joining me again today. I've got a really cool podcast lined up for you. I'm having a conversation with Tony Jones. Tony Jones is a friend. He's an author. He was the editor of my last book. He's had a very interesting and rocky road the last few years in his professional life, in his personal life. And the path that he found solace in and kind of a new direction and aim in life, I think is very interesting. I think you'll enjoy this conversation. I think it's also quite timely. We talk about false accusations and the internet mob and what it's like kind of in behind the scenes of the Christian world, the evangelical world, the emergent world. So that was our connection. Tony and I met in some of these emergent Christianity circles. If you don't know what that is, stay tuned. And he's since kind of out of that world, and so am I. So we have an intriguing and I think interesting conversation. He's also has his own podcast called The Reverend Hunter, which I really enjoy. And so you can check him out there. What else do I need to say? I need to thank my Patreon supporters who make this podcast happen every month. I really am very grateful. It couldn't happen without you. And thanks for your feedback and your comments and your questions through the Patreon site, through the app. It keeps me going. It gives me ideas. So keep it up. Really, really grateful. One of the things that comes up in this podcast with Tony Jones is we talk a bit about Israel. He's got a question for me about the land. He's never been there. And I'm mentioning that now because I do have an Israel trip planned coming up in March. And of course, the world is the way the world is, as you know, but things look promising for this trip happening in March. The main group is coming from Denver, a church there, Denver Community Church. They've been, I think, this might be their fourth time, for sure, third time. And I mean, different people are coming each time. But if that is something that interests you, go to my website, kenttobson.com, look under the tours section, send me an email, and I'll send you the details. A huge part of the Israeli economy, both Israelis and Palestinians, relies on the tourist industry, and it's been almost completely shut down it'll be coming up on 2 years. And of course, I have friends, Palestinians and Israelis, that are my contacts and colleagues there, and it would be really, really good to get back, not only just to support them, but to experience the land in the way that I guide and lead tours. If that is something that interests you, check it out. I really still feel pretty passionate about the opportunity. It is a privilege and a life-changing kind of experience for most people who come with me. Not only do we study the origins of Christianity and Judaism and the Bible and cultural background stuff, but you get a taste of what is the modern state of Israel and what are some of the questions. It's really a 101 when it comes to that. Most tours are really heavy-handed one side or the other, pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli. I try to just enter the country as a tourist and as a learner, as a student, so the trips introduce you to those questions. It's more of a deep dive into the history of this place, and it's also a chance to be outside. We spend an enormous amount of time walking and hiking and talking. It's a pilgrimage in the traditional sense of the word, where it's a journey, and I don't even know what's going to happen. Of course, I have an itinerary, but there is flexibility and there's conversation, and I think people on my trips feel at home, whether they're new to faith or they don't have any faith or they lost their faith or they have questions about the Bible or about Christianity or about religion more generally. I I try to create a welcoming and I think inquisitive environment. So anyway, enough on that. I just wanted to throw it out there. There are spots available right now. Yeah, so if that interests you, would love to have you join me in this very cool part of the world. So I think that's it. I hope you enjoy the podcast today. Again, thanks to my Patreon supporters for making it happen. And I'll see you down the road. I got a couple of other special guests planned. And of course, I'll be cranking out my own solo podcasts as the months unfold. Oh, one more PS. I'm going to be doing a lot of traveling in the fall. I will be gone the end of this month and also a lot of October. My guide training work at Animas Valley Institute in Colorado is kicking off again. So I'll be in wild places. So MIA for a while, but in the best kind of way. So I'm really, really looking forward to being in Southwest Colorado, especially this time of year. Oh man, it's amazing. So what a gift. And so I'll be out of contact here and there, but I'm sure I'll come back with all kinds of ideas and I guess fodder for future podcasts. So talk to you soon. Peace. All right. Welcome to Hints and Guesses, my podcast. I'm with Tony Jones today. Super excited about that. And I want to say as genuinely and sincerely as I can, thank you for changing my life. And I mean this in some very direct and obvious ways. You invited me to this thing called Christianity 21 with 21 speakers. And I gave a talk. This is when I think I was the pastor at Mars Hill at the time.
You were, yeah.
Yeah. Mars Hill, Grand Rapids. I guess we have to make a distinction now.
now you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
You did back then for a long time you didn't, and now again you do.
Okay. All right. So the other Mars Hill. And this was the first time I really ever told the story about being bitten by a camel out loud to anyone. And I told it, I felt tentative and unsure. I don't mean so much in the delivery. Maybe I seem that way too. I just mean like, what happened to me and what is happening to me? And I don't know, that started a whole cascading effect in my own life. And of course you were also the editor for the book that eventually became Bitten by a Camel. And you really, really helped me, get closer to the story or bits and pieces of the story of my life and what was happening, and really pushed me to be more personal and less abstract. So I want to say thanks. And yeah, maybe at this point, I'd love for you to just introduce yourself a little bit. Like,
yeah,
who's Tony Jones and where are you coming from?
And why, and why, if you have an opinion about Tony Jones, is it probably wrong? That's been my experience lately. Kent, I remember that. Here's what I remember about that experience of hearing you give that talk. Is it's interesting, the title of your podcast, because I think, now look, I didn't go to Mars Hill. I was hearing about this mostly from you, but maybe just it was also in the air, is that when you were preaching at Mars Hill, you were preaching some hints and guesses about where you were going.
Mm-hmm.
But at Christianity 21, you kind of brought it all together in a 21-minute talk, and like you laid it all out there for the first time, in a public setting. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that Doug Padgett and I could make a space that was safe for you to do that. If I'm remembering that right. But I remember it being very powerful, particularly for you, I think. But I mean, for everybody there. But you were obviously in a place of people that were almost all pastors, Christian leaders, and probably in general more progressive than the congregation at Mars Hill, Grand Rapids.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I do remember that. And I will tell you, I am so proud of acquiring and editing your book I still use it. Actually, I teach writing classes about memoir,
Hmm.
and I use your, I have this thing that you probably heard me talk about before about every book, including memoirs, needs a hook and it needs a payoff. And what I think is why your book succeeds is it has a hook. Bitten by a camel. You're like, what the heck is what's bitten by a camel? Plus, at the time, you had some notoriety for being at Mars Hill and for this line. If I'm getting this right, I don't even know what the word God means anymore.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
preaching that line and making noise, made some headlines in Grand Rapids and around the country because of the stature of that church. And then the payoff, though, at the end of the book, and I show up on my keynote presentation, I show up a page of your book in which you basically challenge the reader to allow themselves to be bitten by a camel, or to look back on their own lives and say, when were you bitten by a camel? This kind of thing. It's like, it's not just about you, but you turn it outward to the reader. And what's the payoff for the reader? The reader gets to the end of your memoir and thinks like, oh my gosh, am I open to those kind of encounters? And then to looking back on them and interpreting them, or seeing what they were about for me, because obviously at the moment you were bitten by a camel, that story grew in significance in hindsight.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. At the time, it was just like you were tired,
Yeah.
dirty, anyway, I just have such vivid memories of reading that and how well you wrote about that experience of that day. And, like renting a blanket from somebody up on the mountain and everything about it. So that I'm glad I could play a part in having that come to print.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm a Minnesotan. That's one of the ways I identify myself. I'm a real believer that Minnesota is the greatest place to live in the world, and I will live here till I die. I'm a father to 3 kids who are 21, 20, and 17. So 2 in college and 1 in high school. And I'm married to Courtney, who's the love of my life, who's not the mother of those children, but is nevertheless my partner. And I mean, she's everything. She rescued me and saved me from a very difficult time. I grew up in the mainline church, which put me a little bit out of step with the rest of the people I hung out with during the 10-year run of the Emergent Church movement, because most of them, yourself included, came from evangelicalism. Yeah. And I didn't. I came from a progressive Christian church, Congregationalist church here in the Twin Cities. We had women pastors and we had gay people and stuff like that. So we didn't do gay weddings at the time, but when I was growing up, obviously that wasn't much of an issue yet in kind of white suburbia. But we were pretty progressive. And so I felt very early on that I should be a pastor. It was what I wanted to do. And I was affirmed in that at that church.
What's that mean? You were affirmed? I mean, the church said, yes, we agree with you, or what do you mean?
I mean, the church put me in leadership positions from like the time I was in middle school, having me teach Sunday school classes. And then when I was in high school, I was quickly elevated into leadership positions of being a church camp counselor. And then in college, I was a summer intern. I was getting encouraged to go to seminary. When I went to seminary straight after college, the deacon committee of that church, the deacon board, gave me money to help pay tuition every year. I came home and they had people praying for me while I was in seminary and meeting with me every time I was home for vacation or whatever. So I went straight after college. I went to college on the East Coast, and then I went to Fuller Seminary immediately after college. And, I was done with my MDiv by like 24 or something, 24, 25. Loved the academic aspect of seminary, loved theology, loved philosophy, particularly at Fuller at the time. There was a lot of talk of postmodern philosophy and how that was in conversation with Christian theology. So I did a lot of studying of that. Then I spent some years, 3 years, working for a short-term mission organization, helping launch an organization called YouthWorks, which included living on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, which I've recently done some writing about that. And I wrote a line in a memoir that I've written that says, I think that's when I was the most Christian, was when I lived on the Indian reservation.
What does that mean to you?
I mean, it was just like every day I woke up, Kent, and I knew what I was supposed to do.
Right, I see.
Like I sent these kids.
You had a mission.
I had a mission. I sent these kids out to paint houses and run vacation Bible school. And then I'd go over to Pinky's store and sit there with the old Lakota guys and drink crappy coffee in a styrofoam cup, even though it was 100 degrees outside, and they just welcomed me in. And I mean, they called me pastor, and there's a lot of mischievous humor in that, in that culture that I kind of went right into and felt very much at home with. They just, I don't know, everything about it. I just felt like I was clicking on all cylinders in my mid-20s when I did that. Then in 97, I took a job at my home church as the pastor to youth and young adults. I also got married in 97, bought a house in 97, got a dog in 97. I was 29, and all those things, all those adulty things happened. And I worked at that church for 7 years, left in 2003, went to Princeton to get a PhD in theology.
Why? I mean, what changed from I'm a pastor, I'm caring for this local church. I mean, why go get a PhD? What was pulling you?
I'd always loved and excelled at school. I just was good at school. That was one aspect of it. I think it occurred to me at the time that maybe I wasn't cut out to be a pastor, because the people who seemed to be appreciated as pastors were not Enneagram 8s. They were softer people with bigger hearts. You know what I'm saying?
100%. Yeah.
Pastor Jeff, he has such a big heart. Nobody ever said that about me. They'd be like, Pastor Tony, he's opinionated. So my line at the time was, I'm too big of a asshole to be a pastor, so I better go be a theology professor. Plus, in 2003, man, that was like the zenith of the emergent movement. And
okay, you're about to say something else, but let's. Sure. I don't know how many. I'm sure some people will know what the emergent movement was. And I should just say, 2003. That's an interesting year for me too, because I moved to Israel. I left the other Mars Hill as the worship pastor and moved to Israel to go to graduate school. So, anyway, So the emergent movement, what was happening?
The emergent movement, in brief, was a movement, a group of people, Gen Xers, who were in their 20s and 30s at the time, with a few outliers like Brian McLaren, who's 10 years older than we, who wanted to reform the church in America, particularly at the beginning, the evangelical church in America. It was a group of people who, like yourself, had grown up in the big box, seeker-sensitive churches of the baby boomers, and were rejecting that model of church and trying to develop models of church that were smaller, more authentic, moving from the suburbs back into the cities, trying to be more theologically sophisticated. So that was the emergent movement. And, for about 10 years, we were really popular. I mean, we were on the covers of magazines, and I was getting flown around the world for speaking gigs, and I was getting book contracts thrown at me by publishers because we were like the it boys of the Christian church at the time. And 2003 was really the peak of that. And so I was not only getting book contracts and stuff like that, but there was also a sense in the kind of core group of the Emergent posse that it would be good for one of us at least to get a PhD in theology, because we weren't being taken very seriously in the theological academy. So we were getting a lot of buzz around people who were about like, how do you make churches grow? And how do you get Gen Xers to go to church? They don't seem to go to church. Those people were interested in what we had to say. But when we were starting to talk about theology, philosophy, biblical interpretation, people were like, you're just a bunch of youth pastors. What do you know?
Yeah.
So it seemed there. So anyways, it was a confluence of things. I never really wanted to be a professor per se, and I've never actually applied for any professor jobs. But I did want to get a PhD in theology, and I did. From 2003, I finally wrote my dissertation in 2011. As you know well, my personal life came apart during that very window of time. And I ended up getting divorced in 2008, 2009. Really, really ugly and terrible. But got through it and was kind of through it. And then when my most recent book was published, my ex-wife made a bunch of allegations about me, false allegations about me, as a result of basically, to put it in a thumbnail, because she lost custody of the kids and I gained full custody of the kids. She kind of lashed out at me.
Online?
Online, which caused a great deal of pain, personal pain, and lost career opportunities. You were right in the thick of it with me there for about a week.
Yep.
And so, yeah, my life has changed a lot. I think about that a lot. 15 years ago, I was, Tony's going to come to an Emergent speaking tour in Australia, or Tony's on a flight to Malaysia, or Tony, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That
do you feel like, are you disappointed by that? Or is that just what's the feeling associated with, that's not my life anymore?
Yeah, it was really hard for a long time because so many friends abandoned me. Because in the church world, when you go through what I went through, you just kind of become radioactive,
Yeah.
And people were trying to make careers for themselves, and a lot of other kind of minor Christian celebrities like me, to have me around didn't help them get speaking gigs and book deals or whatever. So I used to have a huge circle of people around the country and around the world, and my life right now is really small. It's very, very small, very contained. For a long time, I struggled with the idea that I had worked so hard. I'm very ambitious, a very driven person, like I've already said, on an Enneagram 8. So any of your listeners who know the Enneagram will understand that. I'm just like a kind of a driven leader type person, the challenger, some people call the 8. And I made a living at that. Some of the same places you spoke, the National Youth Workers Convention, I was kind of the postmodern antagonist. They would have debate people like Duffy Robbins and Chap Clark and some of the old school youth ministry guys. I had very popular blog on Pathos that was known for being abrasive and aggressive. And a lot of that stuff came back, to haunt me, unfortunately, because it was that, I don't know. I mean, I could go deeper into that, but the hardest thing was that I worked so hard for 20 years to build a career, and then it was gone like literally in 2 months.
Yeah.
My entire career was gone. And that was so head snapping for me. And now you see it all the time with the Me Too movement.
Yeah. Say more
it's
about
happening
that.
It's happening to other people, and it happened to me before that whole thing happened. So I didn't really have a context for it. It seemed so unfair, and it seemed so unjust that it was really hard for me, because I just wanted somebody to make it right, to see the truth and make it right. And I'm like, look, the courts awarded me my kids. Like, I've been vindicated. Didn't matter. But now you look, of course, now I see it happening to other people, some of whom are falsely accused and some of whom are accurately accused. And I'm like, oh, okay. Now it's happening a lot. And it is, for sure, because of the internet. Like, without the internet, wouldn't have happened to me, and it wouldn't be happening to a lot of other people either. So
yeah,
I'm
it is.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, the culture is like, you're guilty until proven innocent.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way it goes. And then if you're, in your case, proven innocent, well, you still have got this cloud, this radioactive cloud hanging about you. So you're probably not worth getting near.
So I don't know if I don't know if you want to talk about what happened with you and me, but like, I was supposed to preach
fine
at your church on Palm Sunday, the week my book released.
Yeah.
It was my biggest preaching gig of my life that I'd ever had. I'd never preached at a church that big before. I had a book coming out from a major publishing house, like my second ever major, publishing house book release. And your elders made you cancel me.
Yeah.
And I remember the phone call, and you were just like, I don't believe the stuff that's about you on the internet, but there's nothing I can do. You're just I don't know that you use the term radioactive, but it's just like, we just can't, it doesn't matter if it's true or not, basically.
Yeah.
That's irrelevant.
Yeah. No, that's a rough, that's what happened. I remember talking to you on the phone. I remember pacing around my own bedroom.
You were in grief. You were in grief.
It was such a terrible spot to be in, because it's funny how mega churches they all have these power dynamics. And usually I have the power. I don't mean to be arrogant. I just mean that's the way they're set up.
Yeah.
And I get up there every week and I get to say essentially whatever I want to say. And so there's always this tension, but when it came to something like this, all of a sudden it just like flipped around. And that was really the first time anyone had ever told me, no, that's not going to happen. And, I suppose I could have, I don't know. There was nothing. It came down to like legal issues. Like we're the elders, the bylaws say, and we're just not going to take this risk. And even if it was, well, what if in a few weeks all this gets cleared up? Because it was like coming down to a matter of days or weeks, if I remember correctly.
It was just, I think it was the week before, or something.
Yeah. And it was still like, no, we're not going to touch this. So, it was terrible. And it's just it's gross to see behind the curtain of how a big church works and what they're afraid of. And just, I don't know, put you in such a terrible position that caused a lot of, personal suffering and career suffering. It's terrible. Yeah. I'm sorry about that. It's just a dark little chapter. And as I think about this story, and it's funny because I probably left Mars Hill that same year later
Yeah,
on
and
that year.
it was that same year.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was not long after that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I even, I mean, I could go back and do the math. It's probably not worth it, but I think this was the fall or coming up on the fall that your book was coming out.
No, it was Palm Sunday.
Oh, that's what
It
you
was in the
already said
spring.
that.
Yeah.
You already said that. So then I probably left 6 months later. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember thinking when you left, looking back on it and wondering if already you'd kind of been starting to be stripped of some power, or how that, I didn't know the internal dynamics of the church or whatever. And of course it was extremely generous offer to have me come and preach at your church on Palm Sunday. Not many churches have guest preachers on Palm Sunday. And
Well, and we
and
should
I will
also,
just say this: you still paid me. You still send me the because you're like, we're still going to pay you. I was like,
it's
yeah. I mean, that
terrible.
was
Yeah. Thanks.
no. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was a dark time. And my life is so different from that now. Uh, so different.
You
Yeah.
know, I think we should add, because the title of your book was "Did God Kill Jesus?" And that's why I wanted to have you at Marceau. It wasn't just like, well, um, I mean, you weren't my editor at that point, you know.
Right.
It was just I was interested in what you had to say, and I thought it was pushing on things that mattered, and that mattered at my particular church at Marceau. We were hovering around these questions of atonement and what is this story that we're binding ourselves to. And that was the right Sunday to do it, on Palm Sunday. But mixed, I already knew it was going to be heavy.
Yeah.
It's not like a light topic. Like, let's have
Right.
Joel Osteen come and smile at us.
Right.
It's like, all right, we're going to talk about something very challenging that's going to push on people, and then combine it with these other accusations, and it just became like
It was too much.
it was too much. It was too
Yep.
much.
Yep.
Yeah, what a time. Um, yeah, I don't I mean, so can you fill in some details between did God kill Jesus and you're sitting now in a much
Yeah.
smaller circle of connections, and what are you doing? How did you find your way?
I mean, I wonder how closely you and I even track on this. I mean, how similarly our paths have gone, because I was working at a publishing house at the time, and that was paying the bills while I was still doing a bunch of side hustles of speaking, writing, etc. Just because, having gotten full custody of my kids, I needed health insurance and everything else. But I finally just pulled the plug on that deal. And I remember the guy who had been the publisher moved. I mean, he'd been an editor or something. He moved to a bigger publishing house in Nashville, and he texted me something like, or emailed me, "It's time for Tony Jones to get back to being Tony Jones." And when he said that, it was interesting, because as much as I loved helping you birth your book, I really felt like I need to stop editing other people's words and start writing my own words again.
Totally. Yep. 100%. Yeah.
So
And
that,
same with setting up conferences and booking people, and which is the other or our other dimensions of what you were up to. Which is
I was doing a lot of
yeah,
that with Doug, and he went in a different, more political direction, and I decided I could somehow afford to quit my day job and write. So the last few years, especially during COVID, everything dried up. I was doing a lot of freelance writing. Most of my writing these days has been in the outdoors journalism world. I've written for several periodicals, and I've written regularly for the Minneapolis paper here, including a series of stories on the Boundary Waters. So that's been really fun, but a lot of freelance writing dried up during COVID just because everyone's budgets got super tight and stuff like that. So then I had been kind of pecking away at this memoir. I finished that, which was a harrowing experience.
Yeah.
And I've been writing fiction recently. So that's what I've written 1.5 novels in a trilogy. So I just, I get up at 5 a.m. and drink some coffee and read the newspaper. And then I come sit right here and I write till I can't write anymore. And then I go to the gym and then I come home and I look back at what I've written and then I return emails or, talk to people or whatever. And then, late breaking development is I started on staff at a church this just a few days ago, the 1st of September, as just 15 hours a week as a teaching pastor, interim teaching pastor, which different than you were probably called a teaching pastor or a lead pastor or something.
Yep. Teaching, but same.
Yeah, teaching pastor. In the evangelical world, that's more of like a lead pastor role.
Yeah.
But in the mainline world, there's a lead, a senior pastor is what it's called. And then there's maybe a teaching pastor. My role is teaching adult ed classes. Like I'm teaching Wednesday night class on Christology coming up this month, and then going through the course of the year, going through all 4 gospels. Plus I'll be preaching pretty regularly at this church as well, while they're in an interim looking for a new senior pastor. So yeah, back at church staff for the first time since 2003, which is a crazy deal.
Yeah. I mean, it's okay. This is kind of, how did you, I guess this is an odd way of putting it, but how did you not lose your faith? Or did you? Or what was your relationship with your own faith, with Christianity, as you were just sort of being dumped by the world that you were sort of operating in for a while? What would you say?
That's a great question. I think that my faith has definitely evolved. I really do think that it was a great benefit for me long term, having grown up in a more progressive Christian tradition. So I simply did not have any fundamentalism to shed. I see people going through deconstruction now, and it's almost all evangelicals going through you just don't see mainliners going, no Episcopalians are deconstructing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
So the Christianity I grew up with was always very open, inclusive, progressive. We were not hung up with things like the historicity of particular episodes in the Bible, or the 6 verses of the Bible that reference homosexuality. That just wasn't the version of faith that I was raised in. So it wasn't one I had to shed. I'm naturally skeptical. But I try not to be. I have a few commitments. And one is that I think that the scientific paradigm under which we all now live, which has for so many people basically taken away, given them reason not to believe anymore, because there's materialistic answers for just about everything. I don't think the scientific paradigm is permanent any more than the angels and demons of medieval European Christianity was permanent. Like, I think the scientific paradigm will be overturned. Might take 500 years or 1,000 years or whatever, but it's not going to last forever. It's how we understand the universe now, and we're as committed to it as people in the Middle Ages were to angels and demons. But it doesn't make it any more real than angels and demons. The scientific method isn't any more final than the Summa Theologica of Thomas Aquinas was. I mean, at the time that seemed final. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
science is just another framework, intellectual framework that we use to understand our world. So I just have a lot of humility about what we can know,
Mm.
what we can believe. And, I was just listening to a podcast on Immanuel Kant this morning while I was working out, as one does.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that make you slower or faster while working out? Or
That's a
what
good
effect
question.
does that have on you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good
You
question.
have to pay attention next time.
I bench pressed way more than I
Oh yeah.
normally would. I had a categorical imperative to
Yeah.
bench press more than
Exactly.
usual.
You're just throwing
Um,
it up. All right.
and I mean, Kant's one of these guys, I think, who, he started this whole move, I think, toward epistemic humility by saying there are limits to human knowledge, but the only way we know our limits is by basically being outside of those limits or imagining what is outside of those limits.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit like the fact that you can imagine God, the fact that the human mind can imagine a being called God means that there's at least the possibility of that being called God.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
not anything we can ever prove.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably doubtful we can ever even experience it, although I know we think we experience it, but it's tricky to not have those experiences and have them be written off as there's scientific ways to explain human spiritual experience. So I just have a great deal of humility about it. That's the first part. And then the second part, Kent, is that I continue to be when I have the opportunity to preach, particularly to preach about Jesus, I find it a thrilling endeavor.
Mm.
Like, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I love thinking about making the life of Jesus of Nazareth become alive or vibrant in the eyes of people in a congregation. If I can make something like that real to people that seemed unreal, I think that's good. And just generally, whether it's true or not, the church is good for the world. At least the version of church I'm in, like the church I'm on staff of right now, it's good for the world.
Mm.
It's good people. It's progressive. It's loving. It's inclusive. It's making the world a better place. You can't say that about every church. I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think like the church I'm at now, it makes the world a better place. So in some ways, it's not totally, it might be immaterial whether God exists or how deep my personal faith is or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'd say this in short, I never lost it, but I did kind of take a hiatus. And I would also say this, I don't know what, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Just because the people who rejected me or threw me off the bus of Christian leadership are Christians who believe, I never took that to be a reflection of the divine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope not.
You know what I'm saying?
But yeah. But it can get conflated easily. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it just never did.
Mm-hmm.
That was never like a rejection by God or like, screw those people and
Mm-hmm.
their God.
Right.
I just was like, you're like betraying everything you've said you believe in.
Yeah. Just like human beings are prone to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. How, that is, I appreciate what you're saying about your humility around these things. And that's attractive, maybe that's what you mean by progressive Christianity. Maybe you could try to define that, because I have, I'm not sure what I think about such a term. But if that's one way of defining it, a sort of, maybe it's an epistemological humility about its own structures, is an element. And that is life-giving. That's even to say to people, that the scientific method has limits. We know we know it has limits using its own paradigm. It like betrays itself. And also to say, hey, this is how human evolution and thought unfolds, and it will be replaced by something. I think that's inviting. I mean, people are hungry for that sort of thing, especially in a world that is so mistrustful of everything right now. Everything, like, just we don't know where to look. We don't know whom to trust. So, and maybe you want to say something about progressive Christianity. I wouldn't. What is it?
Well, uh, probably the easiest way to talk about what is progressive Christianity is to talk about what it isn't. And what it isn't is a faith that is tied to the Bible as though the Bible were some infallible or inerrant text.
Yeah. Maybe that's the dividing line right there.
That's the dividing line, right? Isn't that the dividing line for Christians in general, is how they read the Bible? I mean,
Yeah.
I really think that it almost every, I'm not saying back in the day, not that this does not go back to the Great Schism, in 1054. This does not go back to, I mean, maybe it probably does start in 1517 with Martin Luther, saying like, I'm reading the Bible differently than the Catholic Church.
Well, that is more like I'm holding it differently. I don't know if he was reading it differently, but holding it differently for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it's a dividing line. Yeah,
it's a dividing line. So I hung out with some conservative pastors a couple weeks ago, and we were fishing, and one guy said to me, he's like, it was not an accusatory question. He's a pastor of a church in the South, and he said, can you give me give me a theological defense for being open and affirming with gay people based on what Scripture says? And I said, do the women in your church wear head coverings? And of course he said no. And I said, why? Why don't they wear head coverings? He said, well, because Paul's requirement that women wear head coverings in church was cultural. I said, all right.
Yeah, done.
That's my argument.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you can't just randomly pick some stuff. Like, either be Amish and make your women wear head coverings, or if you're going to let women come with uncovered heads and gold and braids in their hair, which are directly against stuff Paul wrote, you can't just pick and choose. So he said, I went on. I said, do you let divorced people preach? Divorced men, men only. Do you let divorced men preach? Yes. Would your church have let divorced men preach 30, 50 years ago? No. And you just go down the list of like the changes. Did you drink alcohol? Did the pastors of your church 50 years ago drink? No. You know what I'm saying? So progressive Christianity embraces this. This what some negatively would call the slippery slope. But Kent, what I think is why I think Christianity is the biggest religion in the world is because of the nature of the gospel. And the nature of the gospel is plastic. Not like the plastic, the material, but plastic as an adjective, like malleable, shapeable, bendable.
Yeah.
That the gospel, unlike the gospel, and this then goes, if I can ask you a question.
Sure.
Can I ask you a question after this?
Totally.
Because this leads right to the big question I have for you. Unlike most other religions in the world, maybe all other religions that are tied to a particular ethnicity and or geography, Christianity uniquely is not. So it has been able to move into any culture over the last 2,000 years and reshape itself and still be redemptive, life-giving, hopeful, etc. That's what I think is unique about the gospel. it works for poor people. It works for rich people. It works for white people. It works for brown people. It works for men. It works for women, in ways that other religions simply don't. I think one of the things Jesus said, Jesus made it clear, and then it was like really became clear when General Titus tore down the temple in the year 70, is that this is not a geographically located religion. Jesus came and said, this isn't about your sacrifices. This is a spiritual religion that I'm starting, which was dramatically different than, I wouldn't even call it Judaism. I mean, it was pre-rabbinic Judaism, right? It was it was temple-based.
That's coming up at the same time, at least, yeah.
Temple-based Hebrew religion. So I've never, this is just a confession, like I've never had any interest in going to Israel. It holds no allure to me.
Yeah.
It seems like a terrible place, to be quite honest, what I read in the newspaper. Like it's not hospitable,
yeah.
Not it's at war with itself. I know you love it. So I want to know, what is it? What is it about that place that pulls you, that has such a gravitational pull for you?
Well, the brief answer is I don't know. It's alluring. That's what I would say. And my love-hate relationship with Israel isn't rooted in a kind of tourist specialness. That's maybe how it started. I went there as a tourist. But this sort of like, this is the Holy Land. I'm going to get down off the plane and kiss the ground, this kind of thing. It's a microcosm of the major questions and challenges and politics and economics and clash of worldview and clash of religion, all in the same place. So that's alluring. It's also dangerous. It's scary. Israel, for me, even really on my first tour there, which was a sort of a biblically oriented / archaeological exploration, I felt it was hard to know what story is being told here. It's hard to look at archaeological data and information and cultural background stuff without it turning your own ideas about what is the Bible upside down. So I like it for that. It's confrontive. In fact, if you go to Israel and it affirms your theology, I mean, then you have a terrible guide. And I'm serious, on the right and the left. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's like, this place does not affirm particularly American Western Christianity and its assumptions about even the person of Jesus, and definitely not about the biblical text. So do you want to get close to that or not? So I have enjoyed it dismantling my own kind of worldview, and I enjoy that for others. I don't mean like I'm trying to take people there and rip them to shreds. I just mean it puts pressure, and we need pressure. I mean, Christianity needs pressure for it to continue to do the things that you're describing before, which is change and progress and move around in culture. And so I like it for that reason. And it's also a living place. It's not a relic. It has relics, but the first time you go in the Holy Sepulchre, which is the traditional place of Jesus's crucifixion and resurrection, you're like, this is a carnival. This is insane. Like, what the hell is this? Like, who's in charge here? And see, to me, that's attractive. It's like, how did the very thing that you were describing, that Christianity is malleable and flexible and crosses barriers and ethnicities and languages, that's all on full display, and nobody's covering that up. They're like Greek inscriptions and, stuff in Aramaic, and then there's Russian, and then there's the Ethiopians, and then there are the Coptics, and it's like, and they're all, it does say something about, I don't want to sound too fancy, but like the archetypal power of the Christ symbol. It's not deniable in that sense. It runs through people in various ways. And the fact that it's still here is like so intriguing to me. And even in a culture that's becoming increasingly more non-religious, I think the Christ symbol, it still works. It's like, because Jesus was, like what you were saying before, is also that kind of figure. He's not like, hey, let's all go to the temple and let's give our tithes and get back to real religion. Let's sacrifice things. He's like tearing things apart and shouting at people and loving the wrong people at the wrong time. And so I don't know. It like still strikes me as it hooks people from time to time. And even how, as you were describing preaching, like I'm not in a Christian church anymore preaching, but I also I love to talk about Jesus. It's not like that thing I used to do back when I was super religious and had an office with 2 rooms in it and got paid 3 times as much as I make now, So there's like no difference to me in what's intriguing to me about the mystery of Christ. And I'm not trying to sound fancy. I just really, that's like straightforward to me.
Yeah.
It's a bit mysterious. And it's not done with its effect on the world. That's my intuition and I guess belief also. So I don't know if I answered your question about
Well,
Israel.
yeah. And okay, so do you get frustrated with the people, be they evangelical Christians, Jews, or Muslims, who are like, no, this actual physical material place is really more sacred than every other place, and we're going to fight like hell till it becomes ours?
I mean, yeah, that's frustrating, but I don't know. To me, that's a certain, I don't mean to be derogatory, but it's a certain level of consciousness that it implodes on itself after a while anyway.
But there are a lot of people who think that.
Yeah.
Like millions and millions of people.
I don't know how literally some do, for sure. Some do. I mean, even Jews, even Orthodox Jews, they say the third temple is the state of Israel, but they kind of like, they wink, they're like, oh, well, right. Islam is a little different. And Islam, Jerusalem is tangential. I mean, it's becoming a bigger deal because it's part of the conflict with the West. It's caught in the middle of that conflict, but it's not the center of Islam. So, I don't know. It's like, I think people need something to project upon. So it's like, all right, so we project upon Jesus, like we create Jesus in our own image for a while, but if we stick with it long enough, at least the next generation is going to say, nah, no, not really, and same with the land, that's why I like to take people to Israel, because if they have this super special feeling like God loves this place more than other places, and just turn them loose in a city and they get cut off and they're annoyed and they don't even know who's a Jew and who are the good ones and who are the bad ones, and it's just like, okay, this is just very human. This is way more human. There's an Israeli poet, Yehuda Amichai, that I like a lot. And he has this line, he says, redemption will come. So anyway, I should describe more of the scene. He's sitting there near a Roman arch and they're using him as a reference point for the Roman arch. And he just reverses it and says, redemption will come when they say, do you see that Roman arch over there? Don't worry about it. There's a man sitting there with groceries, for his family. And I mean, he's playing with that kind of tourist sort of approach. And I'm not picking on tourists, by the way. I mean, Israel's a country of immigrants, especially from the Israeli point of view. They're kind of tourists too, so anyway.
Well, you should, I'll tell you, as a pastor and a theologian, when somebody's like, I've been to Israel 14 times, what do you think about Israel? I'm like, not really interested. People just like, what? Yeah. I've never heard a pastor say he didn't want to go to Israel. But I would say if I were going to go to Israel, I would want to go with you.
Yeah, I hope you do someday.
That
And
would be awesome.
and another big, I mean, I've been through my own changes in the last few years, but I'm deeply into sort of wilderness working with people outside, and that's always been a part of my Israel trips. A big part of how people talk about them when they're done is like, it was amazing that we wandered around in the wilderness, and we went to all these unusual places. It's a pilgrimage in the very traditional sense of it's a wandering, and I like to wander, and I like the landscape to have an effect on people. I think one difference maybe between my upbringing and yours that probably feeds into some of my attraction to Israel, it's because of the fundamentalism, like the Bible, the Bible, the Bible. Well, there are like a lot of amazing things in the Bible that the landscape itself speaks to. Like, you can go to Kinneret, that's the technical term, the Sea of Galilee, and there it is. And it is kind of amazing. You're like, wait a minute. So when it says Jesus gets in a boat and goes to the other side, we just have like a sense. It's like the Bible is not pure myth, like fairy tale. It's a combination of things. And that's kind of, I think that's eye-opening for people, and something I enjoy sort of exposing people to. But anyway, just letting the landscape work on people, I think, is powerful. So anyway.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's become a big part of my life too, because when I didn't really have a church to go to, I went outside. And
tell me about that. That's what I wanted to kind of bridge to. Yeah. Tell me about your podcast and what
went
happened.
outside. I went outside, and I've been very fortunate that my family owns property back to the 1960s that my grandfather purchased in central Minnesota, forest land on a lake, and a couple hundred acres, a lot of room to be alone and in the wood. And I've gone up there my whole life, so that was always kind of a sanctuary place for me, a special sacred place for me. But I also, in my dad was not a hunter, neither my grandfathers hunted, but hunting is an avocation that I've taken up in my adulthood, and I absolutely love it. It has become just like the central other than like raising kids and having a job, what I do, especially this time of year. So it's super important to me, and I spend a lot of time doing it, and I spend a lot of time thinking about it. Honestly, it's a practice, and I'm trying to get better at it all the time.
Okay.
So yeah,
does that, I'll use some cliches here, but a PhD in theology, now working for a progressive liberal-ish church in Minnesota. What are you doing out in the woods, killing animals? That's for that's for the right wingers. What? I mean,
yeah, I'll tell you, Kent, there's a lot of red state people I hunt with. Yeah. And I love those people. They are not people I would otherwise be in contact with. They're not people who would be in my natural social circles, nor go to my church, nor, you just don't, you don't find people with PhDs from Princeton and duck blinds with shotguns in their hands. Mm-hmm. So I'm a bit of an anomaly in that world, and they all know it. But you know what? Those guys, they did not give a shit about what the internet said about me. Mm-hmm. So I would go out there to South Dakota to pheasant hunt, and I'd roll into town and walk into the bar and have a beer. And none of those guys, they didn't know about, they didn't give a shit. They didn't care. Half of them have been divorced. My freaking ex-wife, this and that. I'm just one of the guys. I'm not a guy with any extra status because of my doctorate, or because I'm ordained, or because I have 16,000 Twitter followers. They don't care about any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so refreshing
Yeah.
to, like, I could leave, I could drive for 5 hours and land. It was like landing on a different planet.
Mm.
And those guys just love me for who I am. They're like, you're a good guy, good dog, you're fun to hunt with. That's it. That's all we need.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll like debate politics at night at the bar, and they give me a lot of grief, when Trump won. Oh my gosh, when Trump won, I had predicted that Hillary was going to win in a landslide. And then I went out to South Dakota the weekend after the election, and I walked into Shorty's Cafe in Platte, South Dakota, and it's just a sea of blaze orange because everyone's out there to pheasant hunt.
Mm-hmm.
There's my table of my guys, I don't know, 8 or 10 of them. And as soon as I walk in the door, they all yell, Hillary! They called me Hillary that whole weekend. They called me Hillary. And
See, this is hopeful. This is a hopeful vision, I think.
Ken, it's just been really, really refreshing. These guys are salt of the earth and misguided and Fox Newsers and scared of immigrants, and you go down the list, but they're also like, they're real people.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were not in their life, they wouldn't know a single liberal.
Yeah.
And I shatter their stereotypes of liberals, and they shatter my stereotypes of conservatives, because you know what? Mm-hmm. They care about people. They love people. They give away their money. Like they're misguided, I think, on some things, but I'm misguided on some things. And maybe it goes back to the epistemic humility that I try to cultivate in my whole life, because I've lost a lot. So what do I know? I was a cocky SOB when you first met me, and I just don't know that I know that much anymore. Mm. And you know what else? You're going to die. And I'm going to die. And you and I have both watched our fathers die. Mm-hmm. And, there was a, in the Middle Ages, there was and it kind of grew out of the Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome, that they would say, keep your death in front of you at all times, because you will live a better life knowing that you're going to die. So sometimes you see these paintings from the Renaissance,
the skull in one hand.
The skull on the shelf in the kitchen, or holding the skull, looking at it. The Latin phrase for that is Memento Mori. Remember your death. Remember your mortality. And I'm around death all the time, because I'm killing animals and I'm butchering them. And I think that we have, and you know this from your pastoral work too, we have so hidden away death, all aspects of death, from our lives. Our ancestors, everybody was, they saw dead human bodies all the time. Mm-hmm. You and I never see dead bodies, and we might see a dead deer by the side of the highway, but I'm a part of, another theologian gave me this phrase, I'm a part of the cycle of predation. Because I eat meat, I'm implicated in the death of animals just by the fact that I eat meat. So now I'm part of that process, and I'm just in touch with the predator-prey relationship. I'm in touch with my own mortality. So that's the deeper meaning that I've gotten from the enterprise of hunting.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's like, it's stepping closer in consciousness to what's actually true about life and death. And it's not just that we've removed ourselves from dead bodies. It's just from all things death. I mean, meat is something that's processed. Um, even maybe you heard that famous line. So you're a vegetarian. This is from Joseph Campbell. So you're a vegetarian. Can't you hear the carrot screaming? So it's like
Right.
you don't get a free
Yeah.
pass.
No.
And I think we're being asked. I think there's something about our age and our era that's being asked to bring more attention to this life, death, life cycle. And it's sacred. Say, I think about hunting and killing as a sacred, it's possible to approach that from as a sacred task. And the least sacred thing to do is basically the way we consume anything at all. So yeah, and I love what you're saying of just about the left right nature of our country. I mean, I have sort of felt like the Trump for me was, hey, it's time to pay attention to what's actually true. What's really the case, not my illusions of America and even where it's going, just take a look. And the funny thing is I grew up in Virginia in the woods. When we moved to Michigan, I lived far out. We lived far out. I'm not people like that quote, like that you're describing. They don't bother me. Someone with a gun rack in the back of a pickup is not someone that I'm naturally afraid of. I think, but these are just the people that I grew up around, and we have certainly lost that connection right now. It's I don't know. I guess my main point is you're describing something that I think is quite hopeful about what's possible. And maybe one other sort of PS here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have come to think about conservative and liberal, progressive or traditional, however you want to put it, as being largely, well, not largely, partially a matter of disposition. And do we not need like various dispositions? No, we do. It's like a left-right brain thing. It's like you can't ever get rid of this. And I think that was part of the illusion that I was under. I just thought growth meant moving from right to left. That's growth. I mean, that's just naive, really.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how a lot of, especially people in my circles, Christian-ish circles, well, if you're not growing, you're stuck over there on the right, and it's just not true in the sense of dispositions and ways of orienting toward the challenges of life. I mean, it's a facade. So, okay. Let me see what time it is. All right, 2:40. All right, I feel like I'd like to try to land the plane here somewhere. And maybe I want to ask, like, is there something I should have asked you that I didn't? Or is there something that you want to ask me that you didn't? Or both?
Yeah, I just finished reading a book today that I'm reviewing for the Christian Century magazine, and it's a book I think you should read. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. It's called The Herods, and it's about the Herodian dynasty. And what's so fascinating to me, I'm trying to kind of frame up what I'm going to write my book review this afternoon of it. But it reminds me a little bit of that whole world is like, if you think of the life of Jesus or the whole New Testament as kind of a play, that world is like the scene that's been that the play takes place in front of, right?
Yeah.
The scene that's been built and painted by the scene maker people. So Herod is kind of this bit player, right? And there's a couple Herods that interact, between Jesus' birth and then his death, two different members of the Herodian line. But just everything that's going on in all of Judea at that time and Samaria, and then the interactions with the Roman Empire. I mean, and with Rome, I mean, they're part of the Roman Empire, so they're kind of these these vassal kings of Rome. Anyway, I just thought it was fascinating, and I almost think, like, now having read that book, it's almost like homiletical malpractice not to know that,
Mm-hmm.
not to know the context in which Jesus was preaching and prophesying, and John the Baptist was, you know, um, um, telling Herod Antipas that what marrying his brother's wife was, against Torah, and
Yeah.
then getting beheaded as a result. It just shed so much light on all this, but it also caused me, like, man, and this is maybe what you come in contact with by going there so regularly. That place was a freaking mess.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a mess. We have these visions. Okay, not we. I shouldn't just say me. I have these visions of, like, and then all the Jews went up to Jerusalem at the Passover, and they were singing the Psalms of Ascent and blah, 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 blah. And then Herod killed 6,000 of them.
Mm.
Like at different festivals, thousands of Jews would be killed, and there would be fighting in the streets. It was madness.
Yeah. They're also rival temples. There's a temple up north and the temple in Jerusalem. So
right.
Yeah.
Right. And we're wringing our hands about our society right now and its collapse, which I personally think is inevitable. Mm-hmm. The collapse of the American experiment, I think, is coming to an end, which is fine. Like, there's no nation state government it lasts indefinitely. But it was a mess. Like, the backdrop of Jesus and Paul was a crazy mess. And I just think, I don't know, that's not usually my vision of Jerusalem in the day of Jesus.
That's because you haven't been to Israel with me. That's the part of it. Right. It wouldn't have even been a surprise.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the temple, or the palace where Herod the Great was buried is called the Herodian. It's right on the edge of Bethlehem.
Yes.
And maybe one thing you're saying here is that whatever we think about the story of Jesus and its effectiveness, we can say it was born into a world with as much turmoil as we're experiencing now, maybe more.
More. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Blood in the streets, man. Blood ran in the streets. Mm-hmm. At the High Holy Days. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And who was a real Jew and who wasn't. And then this fad happens of the Nazirite vow, and these, it was interesting. It was a fascinating book, and I think you would really love it. And I think probably if your listeners are people who've been with you to Israel or have interest in that or the backdrop, this book called The Herods, it's from Fortress Press, is really, really outstanding.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for the recommendation. Let's land here. I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for telling a bit of your story. Thanks for sharing a bit of the challenges that you faced the last couple years. I want to go on record and recommend your podcast, The Reverend Hunter. Is that what it's called? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. Yep. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And thanks. I think there's not only is it, there's some insider hunting stuff in there. But you're talking about, well, on one level, you're asking, what is a spiritual life? What is our relationship with the natural world like? What does it expose about who we are and the way the world works? And anyway, I have enjoyed it. And yeah, I mean, maybe you want to leave us with what to look for coming down the pipe from you. Anything?
Well, I would love if I don't know if my memoir will ever be published, but I hope it will be. And the title is called The God of Wild Places. So it really is about some of these things you and I have talked about. It's my reflection on how the wilderness was so life-giving to me when I got pushed out of the church. And it's just an interesting time now for me, kind of taking baby steps back into the church,
Mhm.
tiptoeing into the shallow end of the pool to see, do I still really fit here? I love to preach and I love to teach and I know a lot. It's kind of what I was made to do.
Mm.
Um, and I miss the community. I miss the people. But yeah, how will it sit with me during this kind of trial period? That'll be fascinating. I'll just say that in closing, for me, I'm so glad that I had that period of my life where I got to do the stuff I got to do because I got to meet you. Like you and I formed a friendship and were able to even work together on your book. And I miss that. I miss that aspect. Like I miss seeing you at conferences,
Mm.
but neither one of us goes to Christian conferences anymore. But
Yeah,
you know
I
what
don't
I'm
get
saying?
invited.
Neither do I. Neither
Yeah,
do I. But I made a lot of friends
yeah.
doing that. Friends I wouldn't otherwise have, and I
Mhm.
miss that. I'm glad to be in touch with you and others as well who've been a part of my journey. But I miss that. I
Mhm.
miss seeing old friends, making new friends, and some of that. It's life. I don't. It's just life stages. Like things change. I had that crazy 10 or 15 years
Mhm.
of going to those conferences and somebody clipping the headset mic on me and out I walked onto the stage and did my thing.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
you
I know, I
know.
know, I know. Yeah. You know what? I want to say something about the community that was forming, and I think one of the things. Well, I listened to the Christianity Today podcast, what's it called, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill,
Mm-hmm.
and there a lot could be said about that, which we won't go into now. But one of the things that struck me was how unnecessarily isolated I was in my own job as a megachurch pastor.
Hmm.
And there were actually loads of people, yourself included, who were cheering me on, really, and wanted
Mm-hmm.
me to do well. It was still, in my view, the right thing to leave. I mean, it's just much more. If I didn't leave, I wasn't going to grow up. That's what it really boils down to for me.
Wow.
But
Interesting.
I didn't realize, in a way, how good I had it. It just, there was something about the mega church, especially the other Mars Hill, my Mars Hill, Rob's Mars Hill, whatever you want to call it, that we had a high view of what we were up to. We don't need to get involved in these conferences, or maybe we'll show up from
Uh-huh.
time to time. It's like,
That was
and
definitely the attitude from your church toward the rest of us. Like, what
totally,
do we have
totally.
to learn from you guys? Yeah.
We have our own
Yeah.
music. Actually, that was
Right.
what was so shocking about listening to the Seattle Mars Hill, because they had the same attitude, which was,
Yeah.
we don't need anybody.
We don't play cover tunes.
Yeah.
We write all our own music.
And when I heard them say that, it was like, it just cut me. It's just like, oh God,
Oh.
that this is what I was doing. This is what I was busy doing, which is very, I mean, that's kind of comes from that entrepreneur
Yeah.
attitude around mega churches in general. And
Yeah.
I just, I don't know. So in a way, I feel grateful that there were people around me, but I really did not say, "Hey, I need some help here." You know,
Hmm.
Maybe things would have gone a little differently if I would have even seen what was going on a larger scale here. Instead of the
Mm-hmm.
hyper specialness of my particular part of the world. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, enough said about that for right
Yeah.
now. Yeah, let's leave it at that. I'll pause here. But again, thanks for coming on,
Oh
Tony.
man, it's just great to see you, great to talk to you, and I miss seeing you in person.
Yeah, same. All right, peace.